Welcome to Jewish Cinematech, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today I'm joined by producer Karen Heilig, whose film Reckonings, the First Reparations, looks at the controversial, secret, and truly unthinkable negotiations that took place between German and Jewish leaders in the aftermath of the Holocaust. Karen serves as Assistant Executive Vice President of the Claims Conference and has participated in negotiations between the Claims Conference and the German and Austrian governments, as well as claims on unpaid Holocaust-era insurance policies. Could any amount of money, what some called blood money, compensate for what Germans did during the Shoah? What took place behind the scenes and what impact did these negotiations have on the Israeli and German governments and Jewish leadership around the world? All of this leads to a most fascinating and eye-opening film directed by Roberta Grossman.
The survivors, they walked away with only a tattoo on their arm. Everything they had owned was gone, including their families.
When the British Army liberated Bergen-Belsen, I was a skeleton.
They didn't have homes to go back to. They didn't inherit anything from their parents who had been murdered.
We needed basic things, clothes, shoes. Everything we had was taken from us.
Im Namen des deutschen Volkes sind aber unsagbare Verbrechen begangen worden, die zur moralischen und materiellen Wiedergutmachung verpflichten.
How is Germany going to pay for this? We had bombed the hell out of Germany.
The Germans had for 12 years been indoctrinated that the Jews were a danger to their existence. They didn't really understand why they had to pay compensation.
They were not willing to deal with the crimes. Only 11% of the German population supported compensation talks.
Reparations have existed since time immemorial, but the idea of compensation to individuals was unprecedented.
The speech by Adenauer was received by the world as a very brave speech, but not in Israel.
There was a complete rejection of everything German.
It was for them like negotiating with the devil.
There was no guarantee that the negotiations would reach a successful conclusion.
Blood money, I always called it blood money.
I didn't want anybody to think it's a payment for the murder of all the people. You can't pay for it.
I don't know what happened to my parents and my sister. And every night when I go to sleep, I say, Mutti, Papa, where are you? Where are you? Where is my family?
This was a reckoning. One Jewish negotiator said he felt the souls of 6 million Jews in the room with him that day.
Karen, welcome to Jewish Cinematech. So how did this film just sort of evolve? How did it come into being?
Well, we were sort of cognizant of the fact that there was going to be the 17th anniversary of the initial agreements in 1952, would be in 2022, and we wanted some way to commemorate that. And especially in the fact that survivors get compensation today, everybody understands it and knows it, and I think people lose the historical context and really realize how unprecedented and groundbreaking these reparations were, these payments were, and really that they were totally something novel and something that almost didn't happen. And so we wanted to give some historical context to all of this.
So let's try and understand what actually did happen. I mean, here you are, the enemy, the people who had killed 6 million of our people, and there's an attempt to have a dealings with them. The Israelis, as I understand it, the population, some polling was done, and what was it? Less than 20% of the population was in favor of dealing with the Nazis. I know that I grew up, we didn't buy German cars, we didn't buy German products, you know, that's... So how did this initial connection happen? The government of Israel?
I think it was a confluence of some very unique circumstances. First of all, I think that Germany under Chancellor Adenauer, he had the leadership and the desire to deal with this for a variety of reasons, some from personal conviction and some for the political position of Germany. On the other hand, you had Israel in a very desperate economic situation, and Ben-Gurion really taking the leadership and the vision that the state and the survival of the state was of utmost importance. You also had the Jewish world realizing that this was a desperate situation of many survivors trying to rebuild their lives, and really the Jewish world coming together under Menachem Goldman to try and find a way to assist survivors rebuild their lives.
So you pretty much in the film, and what I think you're saying is these three key figures, Adenauer, Ben-Gurion, and Menachem Goldman. They just sort of, began. Who made the initial connection?
Well, the Jewish world had asked for, presented already to the Allies before Germany was created, the desire for some kind of compensation and payments. But nothing really happened until you get this first statement of Adenauer.
Who was what? He was the first
chancellor of the United Germany after Germany was created, when the British and the Americans and the French left, and West Germany was created. So, and I think you had a very unique sort of confluence of different things coming together. And really the understanding that, I think it was very much understanding that the Jewish world asked Adenauer that this had to be based upon Germany accepting responsibility for what it had done, and Adenauer was prepared to do that because it was very clear for the Israeli government and for the Jewish world that the responsibility, the taking of responsibility, was foremost before any compensation discussions could be held.
So they asked Adenauer to take responsibility. Here he is, duly elected leader of Germany, but the people, as the polling seemed to show, were not at all interested in taking responsibility. And if anything, the Americans and the British and the French saw to their benefit not to sort of, do like this to Germany. We want Germany to be part of this anti-Russian world now. Right.
So, yes, I think Adenauer did take, pushed his people, and I think to a certain extent so did Ben-Gurion. He pushed his people, which is sort of an interesting paradigm of what leadership is, which is an interesting other aspect for what we can take from the film for our world today. But I think the Americans and the French and the British had supported compensation and restitution in their military zones, but it was haphazard and it was problematic, and there were problems with it. So. And I think this was a unique moment before this whole Cold War. This was the timing. It was a sort of a sliver of time, a window of opportunity for all the different factors to come together.
And we're talking about 1951, 51.
Yeah.
Germany had been forced to pay reparations after World War I. There was a lot of animosity, a lot of bad feeling about that. And here they're being asked to pay reparations again after World War II, and if anything, by the Jews.
Well, they had the London Debt Conference, which meant they had to also talk about their reparations to the Western powers. But you also had the Marshall Plan. So you had it wasn't just one thing. You also had, which was, had a significant impact on Germany. I mean, the whole view of the West was different. And whilst there was this issue of reparations, there was also this recognition that they would have to help re-establish Germany and support a democratic institutions prevailing in West Germany.
So for our audience who may not know what the Marshall Plan was, can you just explain how that played into this whole discussion?
But I think, as you know, the Marshall Plan was the American government provided funding, infrastructure for the reconstruction, because Germany had been severely bombed, and much of its infrastructure had been destroyed in the last phases of the war. And so this was really the re-establishment of the German industrial base obviously only in West Germany.
Supported largely by the United States. So you had the United States giving Germany money, but at the same time asking Germany to give money to the Jewish people.
I think it wasn't just the United States. I think there was I think all the governments sort of supported it, but I think it was very much the Jewish people of themselves asking for it. And there was this recognition by Adenauer that A, this was the right thing to do, and B, that this was important for him to re-establish the good name and the reputation of Germany and become a leading figure in the post-war world.
So you had many different Jewish organizations out there interested in possibly claiming reparations. There was a meeting, I understand, of 27 different representatives from organizations coming together. We know how the Jewish world works. How did we was it just under Menachem Goldman's? Can you tell us a little bit about Goldman and how he played into bringing these different parties together?
Well, I think Goldman had been a very influential figure.
By the way, no relation to me.
Menachem Goldman was a refugee from Europe and had come and had become very involved in establishing the World Jewish Congress, very involved in the Jewish Agency, was very connected to major Jewish figures at the time, and was really recognized as a preeminent figure. He realized that it was critical for the Jewish world to be united. And I think one of the reasons the Claims Conference was successful then and has continued to be successful is the diversity of organizations within the Claims Conference. I don't know if there's any other organization in the world where you have Agudas Yisrael and the Union for Progressive Judaism sitting around the table together.
Still today. And also geographically, from Jews of Argentina to South Africa, also, to France, to Britain, also, and to Australia. And also politically, you had organizations from the Jewish Labour League to organizations that were more right-wing politically. So you really had, and I think that was the strength of the Claims Conference. And also it was just very, very focused. Its mission was very focused on helping survivors, which is something that crossed all organizations. And I think that was to the strength. Menachem Goldman, I think, himself, when you read his biography, was a little surprised about how smoothly it went, considering the fact that there were so many diverse organizations there. So you mentioned the Claims Conference, which is a key element here. How did that come into being? And the full title was? The Conference on Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, and they very much put the word material in there because they wanted to be clear this was not about forgiveness or justice, because those sort of things were not for the Claims Conference. And I think the film very clearly tries to make the point that there's a big difference between, the forgiveness, responsibility, all these sort of things. And one of the things we really tried to do in the film, and why we did it now, was because we wanted the voice of survivors to be, and one of the fabulous things that Roberta did was to integrate the survivors throughout. There's 5 survivors, one who's Israeli, and 4 other survivors into the movie, who all received compensation as a result of the agreements that were signed. But they talk about their ambivalence about it, their difficulties, survivors who didn't get, and we really, one of the reasons we did it now as opposed to 5 years, I think the film would look very different if you did the film in 5 years, because the archival material would have been there, but the voices of Ben Ferenz, of Yaakov Shared, of the survivors, which really make the film what it is, would not have been there in 5 years. We're gonna go back and take a look at some of the people interviewed, but I still want to try and construct this concept. So in effect, a new organization is created, the Claims Conference, by Goldman, by Saul Kagan, by...
Menachem Goldman brings everybody together, and they meet in the Waldorf Astoria in New York in October 1951.
And they create the Claims Conference.
And it's very important that at one stage you see in the film this sort of, how does the Israeli government fit into all of this? And it's very clear that there are needs of survivors outside of Israel. So it's very clear that the Israeli government will advocate for survivors in Israel, and the Claims Conference will advocate for survivors outside of Israel and the rebuilding of Jewish communities in Western Europe. And so you have these negotiations in Luxembourg. We have these two tracks. Germany meets with the Israelis in the morning and the Claims Conference in the afternoon.
The Israelis and the Jews out and the diaspora Jews couldn't work together. They did.
They used to meet every night to discuss it, but they felt it was there had to be different claims for different purposes, and with Goldman recognizing really the critical, being an ardent Zionist, the critical nature of the Israeli claim because of the economic situation.
So these negotiations take place in the morning with the Germans and the Israelis, in the afternoon the Germans and the Claims Conference. This begins when? March of 1951?
1952.
52?
And it goes.
So it takes a year before the actual negotiations take place.
The Claims Conference Adenauer makes a statement in September 51. The Claims Conference is formed in October, and they start in March 52 in Wassenaar, just outside The Hague. And
in the Netherlands.
In the Netherlands, because no Jews would go to Germany, of course. That was not done then, and so that was where there was agreed that would take place. And it wasn't like negotiations now because of the fact of how communications and flying. It was a totally different situation to how it took many months, and there were as the film shows, the negotiations break down, they come back together, and
they were always in secret.
They were always in secret because there were bombs, and one of the pieces that we interviewed Ben Ferenz about that did not make it to the film, that landed on the cutting room floor, was about a package that he came, because there were bombs being sent, letter bombs sent to the delegations, and so it was very high security, and just to protect them, because as the film mentions, the bomb did go off and kill a police officer.
Wow. Within Germany, Adenauer had to go to the parliament, to the Bundestag, and get permission. And what the film deals with is his negotiations and the fact that there was a lot of resistance to giving money. How did he pull it off?
At the end of the day, he only pulled it off through the Bundestag with the full support of the SPD. He was not the Social Democrats. He was a Christian Democrat. That was not his political party, but he had an association. Some members of his own coalition did not support it, so it only got through with the help of the Social Democrats. But he was adamant that it would go through. And what the film doesn't touch on at all, but it was a reality that once the Arabs the governments realized what was going on, they tried also to put pressure to stop it being ratified by the Bundestag, but that was unsuccessful. But I don't think they realized what the implications would be of these negotiations.
And in Israel, you had Menachem Begin, the opposition leader, calling this blood money. And actually, there was a riot. Almost, we look at what happened at the Capitol in January of 2020, the U.S. Capitol, and at the Knesset there were riots, and Begin led a group, or he was there, and a whole group came in. They did not want to accept this money.
All right. I think that as a matter of principle, there was huge dispute in Israel from both the far left and the far right about this. But one of the interesting comments is from Yaakov Sheret. Once the reparations money...
Yaakov Sheret being the
son of Moshe Sheret, who was the foreign minister at the time and became the second prime minister of Israel. And Yaakov Sheret, his son, remembers that from his own experiences, that once the whole process starts, sort of the opposition to the agreements sort of dissipates a lot. And look, I think it was very emotional, and I think it's very hard for us to judge now what it would have been like then. I mean, I sit in on negotiations with the German government today, 70 years, and I feel the burdens of what I have to do. I just cannot imagine what it would have been like for those negotiators to sit 7 years after the war, many of them having close family who were killed, to do those negotiations. I find it really unfathomable how they did that, and really admirable. you know, and so it's very hard from even the perspective of 70 years to think what the emotions were feeling at that time.
You had Begin in opposition. You had Begin actually resigning the Knesset, if I remember correctly. And you had the Israeli economy in shambles. So Ben-Gurion felt, I take it, that he really needed this money to keep the country afloat. And these negotiations are going on, and finally it moves to Luxembourg. And let's just talk about, you mentioned Ben Ferenz a few times. Tell us about Ben Ferenz and his role in all of this, and who he was.
But Ben, who just passed away, unfortunately, a few months ago at the age of 103, and we were incredibly lucky to be able to interview him. He was the interviews themselves are just amazing. As he had first of all, early before he became involved in the claims conference, he became a prosecutor in the Nuremberg trials of the Einsatzgruppen I think at the age of 26 or 27. He was very young to do that. And incredible.
And before this, he was in the U.S. Army.
Yes, he'd been to Harvard. He's been at Harvard Law School and graduated, been a troop in the U.S. Army, and fought, I think, in the Battle of the Bulge, and and after the war, he had been involved in collecting evidence on the liberation of the camps. And he'd gone back to work in the United States when he'd been asked to participate in the Nuremberg prosecutions, and did that, and he found the evidence of the Einsatzgruppen, and he went and said, look, we have to prosecute the perpetrators of this. All the more senior prosecutors already had trials and were busy, and he was told, yes, you can prosecute them, but you've got to do it.
As a 27-year-old.
That's right. And
the Einsatzgruppen, those people who
murder, they went through they followed the German army after the invasion of Russia. They went behind the army, and basically they were the mobile killing squads who basically killed Jews in pits by the tens of thousands throughout Eastern Europe. And he ran those trials. And after the war, after he'd finished doing the prosecutions, he became involved with the return of Jewish property in the former West Germany. And then he became involved, he knew Saul Kagan from there. And then when the claims conference was started to be formed, he was one of the chief legal minds who helped in the negotiations. And because he was so young at the time, he was the only living person from any delegation alive today. So it was really amazing that we were able to talk to him and and hear from someone who was there from those momentous negotiations what it was like. And
so you had Ben Ferenz in the film. It was just remarkable to watch him, and still so together and
yes, totally lucid
and articulate. You had 5 survivors, and then you were able to track down different dignitaries who are related to some of the key figures working in this. And who were they?
Well, so we tracked down Bettina Adenauer, who was the granddaughter of Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, and had lots of memories of what had happened, and she had of many of the significant events. So, and she was actually filmed in the family house, the Adenauer family house, which is now a museum actually. So it was filmed there. In addition, as I mentioned before, Yaakov Sheret, the son of former Prime Minister Moshe Sheret, who was 93, unfortunately also has passed away since, and he had memories of that. So that was really sort of critical for us, to be able to have sort of the witnesses, who had first-hand memories of the events. And again, the survivors who were able to give their feelings about receiving the money. And we had many academics in the film who have studied various aspects of it. And we also had sort of political figures today from Germany and from the claims conference, and obviously President Herzog from Israel, to give their perspectives.
You are on the staff at the claims conference. You're involved still to this day in negotiations with the German and Austrian governments. Tell us a little bit about, unfortunately, most of the survivors are gone. What kinds of negotiations take place today, and how does that play out?
So the main focus that we have amongst negotiations is, while many survivors have passed away, there are still significant survivors alive today, and many of them live in poverty. And we feel our responsibility is to make sure that survivors live in dignity until their final days. So really for the last number of years, our main negotiations with the German government has been funding that we provide to social welfare services, welfare agencies worldwide that provide vitally needed food, medicine, home care. These agencies in America are Jewish Family Services, but also the Joint Distribution Committee, but many Jewish organizations worldwide. And we also get payments that survivors are getting ongoing payments, and we obviously want to have these payments increased or made more frequent, and so there are new funds, but the main focus is really to help survivors live their final years in dignity, because those who are alive are just becoming older and sicker.
And some have chosen not to receive money.
I'm sure there are many survivors who still have the same views that, it's blood money. I mean, and I think I can understand that. I mean, having survivors what they have gone through, that is totally understandable. Look, other survivors, it made the difference. I mean, we see the survivors in the film who said they needed money for school books and shoes and clothes. They had no other money. They had no inherited wealth. They had no parents. They were alone, and this was often the only funds that they have.
Yeah, I mean, we think about what was lost, what was taken by the Nazis during the 30s and during the war. So certainly there's a very real reason for claims. You were the producer on the film. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what does that mean? People, our audience they don't necessarily understand what a producer does.
Yeah. I wasn't quite sure. This is not something that I usually did. So I took this on, and we did was a variety of things, and from trying to find the different people that were interviewed in the film. That was one of the things we do. Obviously, there was a financial aspect, making sure the film stayed in budget, and that was particularly challenging during COVID because we had to do a lot of remote. Most of the interviews were remote, but not all of them. And every time there was a break in COVID restrictions in one particular country or another, we would rush off to film. So it was making films during COVID. I'm sure many of your other people have also talked about the challenges of that. But also looking at scripts and, and really thinking about how are we going to transmit the messages that we want to transmit. And that was one of the the things as a producer. We really wanted to find the voices that we wanted to have. And I was very fortunate to work with Roberta. Roberta was fabulous. We organised different archival, there's a huge number of archival material, hundreds and hundreds of photographs and films. We had different
Where do you go?
researchers.
Where do you go for those archival materials?
So we had 3 different researchers, one based in Germany, one based in Israel, and one based in the United States, whose job was to look for materials that would be able to be in the film, and then
films, stills, documents,
everything. Some of them we got the home movies of Moshe Levitt from the JDC. They had that. Who
was Moshe Levitt?
Moshe Levitt was a part of the negotiations, and he was the lead of the Claims Conference negotiating team and was also the executive director of the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee. So they had some of his home movies, which we digitized and put into the film. We found his diary in the Claims Conference archive. He had a diary, which is also featured in the film, 300 handwritten pages from the 6 months of that we found. So it was really looking for unique artifacts and things that we could bring to the film.
The German government, back in the early 50s, had a certain non-relationship clearly with Israel. With the Jewish community. Can you talk a little bit about how that has changed over the years and just, is it Germany's support for Israel at various times when other countries sort of backed off?
I think Germany and Israel have a very close relationship today. Having said that, I think that the Claims Conference has been and remains the negotiating partner on Holocaust issues relating to compensation and restitution. I think that was a decision by Ben-Gurion after the negotiations, really because Israel wanted to have, its primary concern was related to security and political situation. It wanted to focus on that, and so the issue of issue for survivors and Holocaust compensation and restitution was for many decades done by the Claims Conference, because I don't think they wanted ever to be a situation where the government of Israel would have competing interests. With Germany, it wanted very much to focus on its strategic interest as the priority, which it should, which it was right to do. And I think that has been a very successful, enduring, strong relationship over over the decades. And I think it has been cross-party within Germany, that relationship between Germany and Israel.
The Israeli government, when it received reparations, did not receive funds. They received goods and services. Was that just to sort of placate those people who didn't want blood money?
I think at the time Germany had no cash reserves itself. So the way that they could pay was with factories that were producing goods, and the Israeli government sent over a purchasing mission to Germany and would go to see what it needed. Everything from trucks and ships to to motors, turbines for electrical generating plants. All these goods that were produced in Germany that were going to be critical to the development of the Israeli economy were what were purchased. And I mean, people joke that the reason Israel had so many buses and things like that from Germany was related to these
all those Mercedes-Benz taxis we would see.
But there were many other aspects that were provided in fuel as well. Fuel was a critical thing as well.
And the Claims Conference did take funds.
So the Claims Conference also, there was an agreement between the government of Israel and the Claims Conference did not get funds directly. It got them, it's complicated, via Israel, because the German government didn't have funds for the Claims Conference. It gave more products to Israel, and then Israel gave funds to the Claims Conference.
You know, Jewish organizations live on and on and on. And some organizations shut down. When all of the survivors are gone, and may they live many, many more years, will the Claims Conference shift gears, or you think this is its main responsibility?
Well, it already has, in the fact that a number of years ago we had a first agreement with the German government for funds for the Claims Conference to do worldwide Holocaust education through institutions worldwide. We had been doing this with other Claims Conference money already, spent since 1995 for a number of decades. And we are funding not only big institutions like Yad Vashem and the Holocaust Museum, but we are the only providers of Holocaust education funding in places like Peru and New Zealand. We fund an educational program in Rwanda, South Africa, also all over the world. And this year we are spending 25 million euros on that, and that amount will go up in the coming years. But we sort of see it related because we speak to survivors, and survivors tell us now, the thing that they want as survivors when we talk to them is they want no one to forget not only how they suffered, but also their family members and what their life was like before the war. So we feel it as part of our relationship to survivors and our interaction to survivors to carry on for them their last wishes. And we really believe that, especially survivors have been an integral part of Holocaust education. They're docents at museums, they go to speak to schools, and as the survivors pass away, that invaluable part of Holocaust education is going away. And we are really cognizant of looking for new places and really having effective Holocaust education with partners. We partner with all sorts of people, all sorts of organizations to do what's called fundamental Holocaust education, curriculum development and teacher training, to more cutting edge, social media and holograms and the like. So we're really starting to do that as part of our commitment to survivors to carry on their memory.
How wonderful. The film is Reckonings. It's a film directed by Roberta Grossman. Karen, thank you so much for joining us. And please try and make every effort you can to go out and see this wonderful, wonderful movie.